Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
3 stories, 2 military related. I studied Russian and mathematics at university. A lot of people joked that it'd make me a good cryptographer, and I always laughed along with them. In the end, though, I did work in the security services. I started off in the RAF, Royal Air Force, which had always been my dream, to be a pilot. It must have been around 2006 when I had my first solo flight at night. I was just flying a light prop plane, glider hybrid. It was just me and the plane. At first it started off small. I could hear feedback through my radio, just static, really. I didn't pay much attention to it, because sometimes frequencies clash and you get a little feedback. I carried on with my sortie, which was just 6 hours of night flying from one airbase in Scotland to one in England, going over the Atlantic as a patrol. The feedback started getting worse, more white noise. At this stage, I was probably about 10 kilometers away from the coast. I quickly radioed into base, and asked if they knew why I was getting so much feedback. They said it was fairly common, but if it got worse, to let them know. By the time this exchange is over, I'm basically over the coast, and the radio is literally so loud with white noise I have to take off my headset, because the noise of the aircraft is quieter than the radio white noise. I'm about a km out to sea, going towards the Netherlands, following a routine patrol path, when my radio goes dead. Completely dead. I decide flying without my radio is too big a risk to take, because I'll probably get shot when I come into land. I decide I'll go back to base in Scotland, where they know the aircraft. As soon as I get back to the mainland, the radio switches back on. I think nothing of it, but as soon as my radio switches on again, base are grilling me about why I changed flight plans and wouldn't report in, so I tell them my issue. They're a bit confused, but tell me to carry on with my flight plans, but if it carries on, to return to base. So, I head back out to sea again, and the radio builds up white noise, and the aircraft becomes twitchier. It's almost like the aircraft itself is afraid of the ocean. Where the air was smooth minutes before, it's now turbulent, and the plane's bucking and rolling all over the place. The white noise increases again, but I don't take off my headset this time. Eventually everything settles down, and we're probably about 20 kilometers out to sea, and I start turning in a wide arc which will take me to England. The white noise had just become more like pops and fizzes occasionally. The more I listened to the fizzing, the more I thought I could hear whispers, a little tinny hissy voice through the radio. I radioed base and let them know I was getting interference. As I radioed base, I could hear the interference even more. It sounded like something underwater. It's hard to explain, but just the noise of water drifting past a receiver, almost like scuba diver noises. It's so loud, the noise is spilling into my headset's mic, and I can hear the echo of it coming back to me from the base. At this stage, I could hear the tech on duty noping all over the place, because that wasn't normal interference, and he said he'd get my commanding officer to come talk to me. By now things are getting really weird in the aircraft. I can definitely hear a submerged voice through the watery interference, but it sounds like it's almost from the World War II era. A very posh voice underwater begging for help in distress. Lights are flickering on and off all over my plane. My strobe lights are turning on and off. My landing lights are turning on and off, and I notice they're going to a pattern. The lights are on for 3 long sessions, then 3 short sessions. That's a distress signal. Suddenly, my flaps change themselves, and I can feel myself losing altitude as if I'm in a stall. And the altimeter is showing me I'm losing about 600 meters a minute, which isn't a massive amount, but is a cause for alarm. I manually try to adjust the flaps, but I can't. It feels like they're locked in place, and I look outside to the flaps, whilst the lights are on, and in the brief flash of the lights, I can see a man in full World War II pilot regalia holding onto the wing, one hand outstretched towards my cabin. The light goes off, comes back on, he's gone. By now my CO is on, and he can hear how much distress I'm in. I've kept my visions to myself, because otherwise they'll think I'm loony, and my CO is telling me I'm sleep deprived and probably a bit starved of oxygen, and to relax. I do so. After seeing the man, the plane seems to sort itself out a bit, and stop acting funny, though both me and my CO can hear the interference, and it sounds like sobs coming through now, watery sobs. I can hear him freaking out a little bit, as he quietly and discreetly asks techs if they can clear up the signal, or if they know what it is. It's nothing he's ever heard before, as interference, anyway. I'm getting closer to the coast now, probably about 6 kilometers away, when I have a sudden, total, engine failure. My aircraft is a glider hybrid, so I can fairly easily just glide it along, especially as I'm by the coast and there's a lot of thermals. So, I'm gliding along, when the flaps thing happens again, but more aggressively. I'm now losing about 1,000 meters in altitude every minute, which is a lot, especially when I'm only about 3,000 meters above sea level as it is, and gliding. I'm essentially plummeting to Earth. I can't change the flaps, it feels like they're locked into place. For the next minute I'm just ramming the gear as hard as I can to try and get some lift from my flaps. I'm starting to contemplate bailing, because I'm essentially dealing with total mechanical failure. My altimeter says I'm only about 1,000 meters above sea level when I can adjust my flaps again. I'm in a semi-stall now, and to get out of it is going to take about 500 more meters of altitude, but it's either that or bailing, so I give it a shot. Now, I have a very strong recollection of spinning completely out of control, a stall which was completely unmanaged, and seeing lights beneath me, in the sea, a solitary bright light. My own lights are dead, so it's not a reflection. As I'm spinning closer, I can see the lights are where they'd be on a plane. It's like a plane is underwater with all its lights on. I remember, my lights suddenly kicking on, a quick sudden strobe flash, illuminating the pilot from before holding onto my port wing, looking forlornly at me. He's closer this time, and I can see seaweed entwined in his headset, barnacles on his outstretched glove, water dripping from his sleeve. I watch horrified as the interference comes back, and I can hear the last moments of a pilot crashing into the water. Base can hear the interference too. The Spectre's hand grabs onto my cockpit opening lever, which is when I realize I have engines back again, and I can overpower the stall. The maneuver seems to take the Spectre by surprise, and his hand misses the lever, and slaps the Pyrex cockpit hood instead. Next thing I remember is calmly flying across from the coast to land. I'm not sure if I blacked out from the stall, and my aircraft just regained equilibrium, as the gliders are designed to, and I hallucinated the entire thing, or whether it actually happened. The aircraft's working like a dream now. I radio base to tell them it's fine and I've nearly chalked up another sortie. What? My CO is relieved and says he'll debrief me in the morning. As I come into land, I look out my port side just to check there's nothing around me, which is when I see the imprint of a hand on my Pyrex cockpit, a small trail of seaweed stuck fast to it, too. A few weeks later at an inquest, the official line given was that the radio picked up interference from a radio program which was airing, and my aircraft suffered a complete electrical and mechanical failure until which normally would have been devastating, yet due to my skill and determination, had managed to successfully keep my head in a dicey situation, and averted disaster. My CO, over a few drinks, told me that due to RAF budget cuts, some of their trainer aircraft had parts cannibalized from other aircraft. Mine, in particular, had props, flaps, and other salvaged materials from a World War II aircraft which had crashed into the ocean. A Navy salvage ship managed to recover most of the wreckage, floating on the sea's surface, but the pilot had drowned, trapped in the cockpit. It was pretty freaky at the time. This is my second story. My superiors were impressed I could keep a level head in a terminal situation. After training, I was assigned to the Army Air Corps to fly helicopters. I was one of the last RAF pilots to be assigned to the AAC, which had a much higher mortality rate than the RAF. The AAC deployed soldiers by helicopter, etc. The RAF just shot a few missiles and shit every now and then from 10 kilometers away. I'm flying the shitty Lynx. It's an okay helicopter, it's agile and can go quite fast, but it's old as fuck, and after Chinooks, it gets shot down the most. Unlike Chinooks, light arms fire can actually penetrate it and damage it. Anyway, I'm flying a squad of 8 soldiers, in a mission that reeks of black ops. My usual observer is dropped, so some army bigwig can brief his men. That's already pretty strange. I'm given no information about the mission, other than transport this cargo to this location by this time. They're going far away from base, and I'll be dropping them off in the Wakhan corridor, from where they can go into either Tajikistan or Pakistan, and also an area where there's fuck all civilization and a lot of mountains, so probably lots of training camps and outposts of insurgents. I'm not really worried, this is fairly routine. Every 6 months or so a pilot will say they dropped off an unmarked cargo near the Tajik or Pakistani border. I've got pretty used to Afghanistan now, but as most pilots secretly are, I'm pretty superstitious, and the pilots who have been here for longer have told us some folklore, from the basic, don't whistle at night or the snakes, demons will get you, to flashes of light in the mountains, thermal imaging which shows heat of people where there are none, or your everyday jinn fucking with you. I just pass off their stories as that, just stories, but tonight something just feels wrong. The air's heavy and humid with expectation. I've got a knot of anticipation in my stomach, and as I fly closer to the Tajik border, the anticipation is growing. I decide to switch to thermal so the observer can be useful and make sure I'm not about to be shot by an RPG-wielding goatfucker. I'm about to be especially vulnerable, as I'm going to hover around 50 meters off the ground for around a minute as the cargo deploys itself. I'm coming in to drop them off, and the observer's briefing them, and I'm trying not to listen, as I keep an eye on the thermal, staying at an altitude of about 800 meters while slowly rotating 360 degrees to do a full sweep. At around 270 degrees into my sweep, I see a massive blotch of heat on the steps sprint off, around the way I'm not rotating. Something that big has to be either a horse or a bear, and I whip around quickly to see what it is, causing the cargo to lose their balance and swear at me. I catch the thing in the camera again, but it sprints off the other way, like it's teasing me, almost. I whip around again, causing them to swear even more at me, and I manage to catch it square into the camera. It was like a horse, but a horse standing on 2 legs, with its knees bent backwards like a flamingo. Its upper body was very warm, and it lacked a neck. Eyes are quite easy to make out on thermal, and as I zoomed in, it lacked a neck, or head, really, and it just had eyes staring out of its chest. Its arm limbs were long, stretching down from its shoulders to its knees. At that moment, the army bigwig saw it. I know he saw it, because I heard the sharp intake of breath as his brain tried to comprehend what it was. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and he just very slightly shook his head. I guess to say, you never saw this, okay? Turning around, to the cargo, he just nodded to them. As we flew off, I could see the multiple flashes on the ground of sustained heavy arms fire, submachine guns and the such. The bigwig and I sat in silence. As the sun began to rise, I saw a big flash of light behind us, from where we dropped off the soldiers, a massive shaft of blue lights, which exploded outwards. I saw a silver cigar fly out of the top of it, towards the heavens. I was wide-eyed, confused, starting to sweat nervously, a cold chill despite the heat inside the helicopter. I looked at the army guy, but he just shook his head. He didn't say anything, just looked stern, and shook his head at me. I remember asking him what it was. what the fuck had I got into, and he just said, we had to contain a situation on the ground. I didn't ask, but I knew better than to tell people. Besides, if I did, who'd believe me? I picked up the soldiers a few weeks later. They were all horribly sick with radiation poisoning. I think one died, but I can't be sure. A few of them were blind. Their fatigues were all ripped and bloodied, with some kind of liquid metal stained on it. My third story: I was a child. I woke up uneasy in the night for no reason, at perhaps 3 or 4 a.m. Against my furthest wall, I could see a shadow, or more accurately, a silhouette of a man. The man was tall. The man was wearing a hat and a long coat. If I looked at him with my eyes open, he would, kind of, jump towards my bed. A foot or so closer, every second. Just against the wall. Then bam, halfway to me and the end of my bed, bam, at the end of my bed. I'd close my eyes, and he'd be back against the wall. Oddly, the covers were off me. I was a child that needed covers to sleep. I knew if I could get my duvet over me, I'd be safe again. So, I very slowly, and carefully, with my eyes squinted, watching him, tried to pull my duvet over me, in a way so slow it couldn't draw attention to me. The entire time, he was watching. I knew he was watching. He knew exactly what I was doing. He knew, without a doubt, and he was loving it. I could tell, he was enjoying the fear, and stress, and negative energy he was inflicting on me, a child. He wanted me to be scared. He meant for me to be scared of him. It was evil, pure malevolence radiated from him. I didn't know what would happen if he ever came up close to me, but I wasn't prepared to find out. Eventually I got the duvet over myself, and just watched him through closed eyes, terrified, until the sun came up. And as the sun came closer to him, he just stepped backwards through the wall. It's hard to explain. Oh, as an addition, when the army bigwig was talking, he never specified what the threat was. I was semi-listening, but the fireteams had obviously been briefed independently before. They all looked grim, but that wasn't peculiar given the circumstances. My theories are as follows. 1. The thing on the ground was just your standard goat lover, acting as a scout, who in my fear, I saw as all fucked up. 2. The cigar shape could have been a missile. It was going so fast, I wasn't sure if it was down, or up, or if the light came before or after it, though the light made me glimpse it. 3. The radiation, I've always thought they could have been in a black ops to destroy an illegal nuclear power station. It seems like the kind of thing the Tajik authoritarian regime would try to do. I've kind of it in my mind as that. A black ops operation to destroy either WMDs, a power station, or they encountered a waste dump of unrefined nuclear waste. Now, I had a very good friend who I'll call Sherlock, because he believed very much in similar philosophies to Sherlock, as in, deductive reasoning, the purity of a priori logic. I've heard him over the radio when he's being shot at and having RPGs fired at him, and he sounded as calm and relaxed as somebody on holiday in an ice cream shop, specifying what flavor they wanted. For example, Cucumber Crisp 071, I'm under fairly heavy sustained fire. It looks like part of my fuselage just gave way, over. That sort of thing. I'm fairly sure he was slightly autistic, because he'd just wait until base told him to pull out or whatever. He also had no mercy. If he had authorization to fire, he'd light them up. No qualms, no limitations. Anyway, I've seen Sherlock quake like a fucking leaf in the winter wind. It must have been around 3 a.m., and there was fuck all to do. I was playing poker against the computer and winning, another friend of mine reading Kant on my bed, when he walked into my room. Pretty unusual, because he always knocked. He delivered some supplies to an outpost about 70 kilometers away from the main base. Not deep in hostile territory, but hostile enough that you'd expect an RPG or two when you supplied them, or took out the wounded, which is mainly what Sherlock did, even volunteering to do it. He'd set down in the afternoon, and helped unload the supplies, mainly medical, ammunition, and tools, and stuck around taking requests from the CO, who was running low on water and water purification tablets. A few privates were on duty in the dusk, and one of them freaked, saying he could see something through thermals that he couldn't see in person. This piqued Sherlock's curiosity, so he had a look. Sure enough, when he looked through thermals, he could see the shape of a man about 200 meters down the path, but looking with binoculars, couldn't see anything, even with night vision. This is quite common in Afghanistan. It's reported uncommonly. Despite being an uncommon event, it's always quite unnerving when it happens, but according to Sherlock, he wasn't unnerved, just his deductive reasoning pricking up. First, he thought the thermals were dodgy, so he used another set, then another set. Then he thought the binoculars were bad, so he used another pair, which weren't just thermal imaging, but infrared night vision, rather than the shitty green-tinted type. It was a grayscale type, which showed significant detail. Now, on the infrared grayscale he could see it. Apparently it was a human in everything other than having a head. The body was human, perfectly proportioned, but there was no head. Now, the other night vision didn't show this. Sherlock, armed with nothing other than our standard issue Browning high power, and probably just a single magazine, strolled 200 meters down the path, to see if he could see anything. Apparently not, though he said it felt unusually chilly, and he did feel quite uneasy. It was on his way back, when he heard soldiers shouting. Looking behind him, he saw 4 or 5 putrefied bodies shambling after him. He described the smell as rancid, and their look as if they had contracted the vilest leprosy. They were moving pretty quickly, and he could see body parts, fingers, hands, even an entire arm, drop off. When he said, "They were like the Walking Dead," I felt a chill go up my spine, and my friend reading Kant actually looked up at us. Sherlock said he shouted a warning to the bodies, apparently rotting as if dead for a few days, appendages and torsos swollen from the sun, and as they continued to gain ground on him, began opening fire. Despite one of them being hit several times, losing most of its shoulder, and through the stomach, it single-mindedly continued pursuing Sherlock, who, for the first time ever, sprinted away. A rifleman at the outpost shot them with a more high-powered weapon, and re-killed one of them. As soon as one of them went lifeless, the others would single-mindedly stuff their faces full of flesh, just tearing it off limbs and bodies. No shame, no disgust. Like they hadn't eaten for days. At this point, the fellow reading Kant piped up. He'd heard of similar stories in his journeys to outposts. Some American soldiers, badly injured and delirious in the sun, told him how they had seen their brothers in arms set upon by filthy mujahideen, and ripped apart, alive. Limbs ripped from bodies, heads from necks, and how they would rip the flesh off with their long-nailed fingers, gouging it out, or bite it off the bones. They had said only fire or high-velocity weapons, not small arms, could stop them. Afghan soldiers, when mortally wounded, prefer to kill themselves than be captured, because they've heard the stories and know the folklore. It is true they kill themselves. I've seen it. I must also admit, as I became more experienced and hardened to the oddness of Afghanistan, I also heard quite a few of these stories myself, to the point where they don't even worry me anymore. I think I even saw a herd of them rampage through a village. But it's Afghanistan, so they could have been tripping on opiates.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.